Suzanne, hello. Suzanne, hello, hello. Shabbat shalom. You're on mute.
Were you at services this morning, Martin?
Just towards the end, yeah.
I didn't feel very good, so I went back to sleep.
Yeah, we were partly there.
Hey, Peter.
I'll unmute myself to say hello.
Hi there, how are you?
Hi, Martin.
Thanks for responding to Louisa, because we were still having lunch and I hadn't gotten around to sending it to her.
No problem. You know, I noticed there's no book or tove. Do you know what happened there?
Friday.
It was on
I don't
Thursday.
think they do one. They do one on Friday, but I don't think there's another one till
It was
Monday.
on the Thursday one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
For some
and it was
reason-
on the Friday one.
Oh, so for some reason I got off the list. I better,
Yeah, there was a Boker Tov. The problem with the Boker Tov is it's gotten so lengthy and got so many things on it that are not relevant to each day.
yeah.
That you got to look for things.
Would I-
It's easy to miss things.
If I'm
Yeah.
not getting the Boker Tov, is Karen the person to talk to?
Yeah, that's who I talked to.
Is what?
Karen. Karen's the person that sends it out. Yeah, she's the communicator, the official communicator.
Because I got kicked out of the game, and I had,
You were
telling you.
yeah, you did something you weren't supposed to.
yeah, and I got stuff on Sukkot, I guess, but not on the
No,
Boker
it's the
Tov.
same-
that
the
left me.
same
Hello,
list.
Gail.
I don't know.
She's muted.
Here's Gail.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi, Gail.
Hello.
Oh. So how was the bat mitzvah girl today? Did she do a good job?
Oh yeah, she was very, very good. The whole family read Torah and they were perfect.
That's unusual and really nice when it happens.
It was a nice bat mitzvah. The only problem we had was at the end of Musaf when Mark was supposed to
Hey there.
do the when Mark was supposed
I
to
need to make you. I'm going to make you co-host, sir.
huh?
I'm going to make
Sarah, co-host.
Zara co-host.
Mention it later.
So Mark froze and it took about 5 minutes or so to reboot the whole thing.
That's happened several times recently.
Yeah, it was just at the end of the Musaf. It was the Kaddish, the
Well-
completion of prayer.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's technology and that happens. I mean, in the middle of the service, my camera and microphone completely went out for no good reason. It's technology.
Yeah, no, the other thing is that when people are standing at the ark, you can barely hear them.
Oh, yeah.
Depends on how close they
No,
are.
I don't think there's a microphone over there.
There used to be one in the ark, but it's probably not working so well.
Probably not.
I think it's remarkable that we were able to have the service we had and that it's trilingual, was kind of trilingual. Last night was trilingual and you had family that was in Argentina. I thought that was beautiful.
Now that's
That's
very nice.
wonderful.
I mean, that's the biggest thing that's happened to Zoom that's been terrific is that family overseas can participate in bar mitzvahs, shiva minions, all kinds of stuff that there was no
Think
way
about
that.
think about Rabbi Teller being able to go to his father's funeral through Zoom.
Yeah.
There was no other way
Yeah.
at that point.
No, I'm not saying, Zoom has been a godsend, really. I mean, it's presented us with some amazing opportunities to study and to continue going to services. But I think people are ready to do more and more in person.
Well, I think it's going to end up being a combination. I think about like when I broke my ankle and I had to get out of all the classes because there was no way.
Right. And today,
Today, I would sit down in front of the computer.
I prefer the classes that are online because there's not much less stress sitting there, and there's a lot less around, I mean, it's very directed and accomplishes more.
On the Gilbert and Sullivan board, we have some people with small kids and they live a fair way out of town. So we've decided to do every quarter in person, but the rest of them by Zoom. And the other thing, of course, is people from out of town. My wife's book club now has people who've moved away. The international, I hear I'm telling about International Voices. If you guys aren't listening to International Voices, it's your loss. But in any case, as Martin can tell you, there were people who are participating, singing in the choir, in the concerts. The concert that was the other day, we had somebody singing from India, we had somebody singing from France, and probably somebody singing from Scotland.
They introduced them. Oh,
Yeah.
Martin, I meant to tell you, and Peter, it was a really wonderful concert. And I
Yeah,
have to
can
tell you,
imagine
I'm
what
sitting in front of the computer singing along. So I'm really, really planning to join.
fabulous. You saw if you think about what Mark Vogel had to do to take the video and audio feeds for 125 people and put it all together. It's
He
a
does an
mammoth
amazing job.
task.
But I'm really looking forward to when they have auditions again, because I really, really want to join.
Well, Rabbi Gelman on Thursday at the Zoom at noon said that the world is we're not going back to what was before. We'll
No,
be doing some of the
Okay.
Zoom stuff in the future. I mean, it's just,
it's going to be a combination of things.
yep.
Hello, Rhoda. Hello, Etta. Are you eating egg salad, Rhoda?
Hi, Lisa.
No.
Rhoda's disappeared.
Peter.
Rhoda, you're on mute.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Michael
Hello,
Moore,
Etta.
Michael Moore were here, he would include a good
Oh,
Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. Yes.
Gittin Shabbos.
Freilich.
This is not a silent group.
It is now.
Hi, Ed.
Oh, we've got 10. 10 is a minion, right? So we'll wait a minute and then we start, because as long as we have a minion, we can start.
Yeah,
10 with Jeff.
I have quite a bit of information. I was afraid I wouldn't have enough, but
That's okay. So therefore we,
Sarah, I don't think you're ever going to have to worry about that.
yeah, well, this topic is so big and there's so much cool things going on. So
Hi, Jeff.
Hi. How are you?
Shabbat shalom, Jeff. Hi, Ed.
Shabbat shalom. Hi, Lisa.
Lisa.
Hello.
Well, it's funny. I'm in a class, actually, Sue Resnick is in it, that finishes this week at Rice. And when people come on before the class, it's so quiet. Nobody says anything. It's very different from our groups.
This group.
Well, this is a group that
Yeah.
no people.
The first time I
Is
came,
that Sue there
you're
with?
so quiet.
Maybe they don't know one another.
Well, that never stops any of the Jewish groups.
That's right.
Born to
They
commend.
know each other. I mean, most of the Jewish groups, you know someone there.
Well, yeah, that's true. Even if it's like an international, you and Gail know a lot of people now.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in classes where somebody from Canada shows up, you know, and we're friends.
Must be Susan Gold.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to, I think we should start. What I will do is I'll mute everybody except for Sarah. And she'll unmute herself. And then if you want to speak and answer, then you can unmute yourself. But we'll start with everybody on mute.
I'm gonna.
Let's go for it. Let's go.
So, oops, let's start. I thought I had this going here. Okay, what I was going to talk about today is the information we have about a Mediterranean society, a particular aspect, and the person who created it, who brought us this discipline. So first off, you kind of wonder what was left to study by 1950. So the first papers that were studied from the Geniza were religious papers. There were religious papers or literary papers, rabbinic papers that had religious or political developments. But, you know, this was only 10 to 15% of the total. There were other documents in there, other pieces of paper, personal and business letters, court proceedings, both Jewish and Muslim court proceedings with depositions, statements, records, and drafts, wills, ketubot, divorce documents, detailed lists of property the bride's bringing into a marriage, the lists of the property at death, deeds of manumission, releases, sale and gifts of houses, etc. Random notes, school books, accounts, inventories, medical writings, fragments. So basically, any paper was dear, so anything which writing was used for somehow got put into the Geniza. And actually, Schechter had found a hint in 1901 that perhaps the use of Geniza writings to understand society might be useful, because he published a ketubah that he found from a rabbinite groom marrying a Karaite. And this is what it looked like. It was Nasia bat Moses HaKohen ben Aaron HaKohen, who was the bride. And the groom was David Hanasi ben Daniel Hanasi, Ras Hashiva Gion Yaakov, who was the groom. And it's dated the 23rd of Shabbat, 1393, which was 1082 in the counting that we use. And it's probably from Cairo. And Martin, would you like to read this translation? And I'll describe it some more.
Sure. And our prince, this David, also stipulated that if, God forbid, this Nasiah shall die without offspring, half of his dowry should be returned to her father's house, according to the custom of the children of the land of Israel. And moreover, he agreed not to force this Nasiah, his wife, to sit with him in the light of Shabbat, nor to eat the fat of the sheep's tail, nor to profane her own festivals, on condition that she observe with him the festivals. And we have carried out an act of acquisition from the honorable, great, holy, our master and teacher, our prince, this David the prince, prince of the exile of all Israel, son of the honorable, great, holy, our master and teacher, our Lord, our prince, Daniel, the great prince, head of the academy and the pride of Jacob. May his sacred memory be for your blessing. As for this Nasiah, a young woman, this virgin bride, daughter of the honorable, great, holy, our master and teacher, our Lord, our noble Moses HaKohen, banner of the Jews, their stronghold and the joy of their crown, with an implement suitable for acquisition, regarding all that is written and explained above, fit and established.
So you can see they're both prominent members of the society. She was a Karaite, and they tended to sit in the dark on Shabbat. That was their rules. And they had different holiday calendars. And he was a high-placed rabbinite. And so the dowry was over 1,100 gold dinars. And the bride and the contract, as you can see, stated the groom isn't going to force the bride to violate her traditions, but she would sit with him during festivals. And it was attested by the Beit Din, and it was witnessed by Yekitiel ben Moses, Nisan ben Mahbub, and so forth. And that sort of indicated that there might be some interest in the leftover documents, but there was very little love for the documents, this, despite this promise. And one catalog actually listed an item as a business letter and therefore valueless. And in 1923, a library assistant described everything that was left in the Taylor Schechter collection boxes as nothing of interest or value. And the late librarian would not allow anything to be destroyed, which is the only reason they were not burned years ago. So, but then what happens? Professor Shlomo Dov Goitein, and he became interested in the Geniza around 1950. Goitein was born in 1900 to a religious family in a small Bavarian town, which was probably equidistant, they said, between Munich, Frankfurt, and Prague. And even though they were very religious, he received both a religious and a secular education. At the University of Frankfurt, he studied Islam and Arabic, and he received his doctorate in 1923 with a dissertation about prayer and the Quran. And he became an ardent Zionist. And so after getting his doctorate, he made Aliyah, and he was on the same ship as Gershom Scholem. And in the 1930s, he studied Yemenite Jewry, which was actually before they were kicked out of Yemen. So he was able to visit with them. And he realized how connected Judaism and Islam are and how much they've influenced each other over time. In 1948, the Israeli government sent Goitein to Budapest on a diplomatic mission. And while he was there, he looked at the Geniza collection they had. It was a collection of David Kaufman. The collection had become disorganized, and Goitein started putting them in order and published pieces. And he thought a lot about the Geniza, since Arab and Jewish contact was very prominent. It was really the peak during the Geniza times from the 10th to 13th century. And in 1950, when he was in England, he was studying Geniza documents at Oxford and Cambridge. And in Cambridge, a librarian showed him several dozen boxes of material. One of them, that he wanted to discard, but he asked Goitein to look at first. And one of the boxes was labeled rubbish. And actually, my background is a box of Geniza documents, unprocessed. He found court proceedings and letters pertaining to the India trade, and he decided to continue study. He convinced Cambridge to keep the documents, and he spent the next 20 years overseeing students and assistants sorting those documents. And this became the new series of over 42,000 documents. The Geniza stayed with him and dominated his work until his death 37 years later. And in 1957, Goitein moved to the US as a professor of Arabic at the University of Pennsylvania. In 1971, he retired from teaching, but he was still a member of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton until he died in 1985. Goitein was really interested in the India trade, but most of the documents that he found at that point were from the Mediterranean side of the trade routes. And so he wanted to know more, but since only 10% of the Geniza documents had been studied, no one else knew what was in it. And so he decided that he really had to put all this together, and he traveled all over the place to try to make this information available to scholars. In 1954, while he was working at the Oxford Bodleian Library, he decided to publish a massive collection of historical documents that he was going to call the Living Parchments. But he was distracted from starting that because he was working on his book about the India trade. But in 1958, while he was at Cambridge, he received a letter from Dr. G.E. von Grunbaum, inviting him to write his proposed Geniza book as part of a project jointly sponsored by the University of California and the University of California Press. So he immediately switched gears and in an effort to recreate an entire society based on the jumble of documents that were scattered all over the world. And here is an image from online of some of the index cards that he created. He traveled to libraries in Cambridge, Oxford, Manchester, London, Paris, Heidelberg, Vienna, Budapest, Leningrad, New York, and Philadelphia. And he consulted bibliographies and photostats. And every document that he looked at had an index card and listed any names mentioned, the language used, the date, etc. And he took notes in English, although from the looks of it, it was English, neither Hebrew or Judeo-Arabic. I'm not sure, since I'm not very good at reading either. And he mentioned any names that were used, the languages used, the date, etc. And he was hoping by taking notes in English, he would help future researchers. So for a long time, this was the only thing people had to look at. And he even declined an offer to work in Paris because he didn't want to publish in French. He wanted to publish in English so people would be able to read it. And basically, he did a lot of work at home with students and research assistants helping him. And he thought the project would take 6 months. But 8 years later, he still didn't have a report. But he did have a preliminary conclusion that he hoped he would have enough of a survey to actually get a good idea of the topics and the types of information that was in the Geniza. But he collected so much information that he ended up publishing 5 full volumes. The first one was on economic foundations, and that was published in 1967, the community in 1971, the family in 1978, daily life was published in 1983, and he sent out the final volume of that he wrote, which was the individual, which was on December 7th, 1984. He immediately started working on his India book. I mean, the man was incredibly productive. And, but 1 month later, he died. But he had asked Mordecai Friedman in 1979, I guess he was 79 years old, that if he didn't get the India book finished, would you please finish it for me? So Friedman did, and he finally published India Traders of the Middle Ages, Documents from the Cairo Geniza by Goitain and Friedman. It's 852 pages. It was finally published in 2007. So this was a massive amount of work. As I said here, the books total 3,095 pages. This is volume 3, I think. Yeah, volume 3. They're very dense pages. He's a good writer, but it's a lot of information per page. His research assistant was Dr. Paula Sanders, and she's now at Rice. And after he died, she published a volume 6, which has a cumulative index of all 5 volumes. And, oh, yeah, I have some notes here. I was reading an article by Renee Levine Melamed that was summarizing some of his conclusions and things that have been found more recently. And what she wrote was, those of lesser stature can benefit tremendously from the accomplishments of those of greater stature. That term has been ascribed to a man who is physically rather small, but whose vision and knowledge was so impressive, it's not happenstance Goitain's recognition that the Geniza offered a gold mine of material to him and to other scholars to follow. And his choice to attempt to illuminate the world of women reflect both his foresight and the acuity of his mind and vision. I am certain that he would have enjoyed pursuing a dialogue with the present generation of Geniza scholars and would have encouraged all the questions and review his conclusions. Goldberg wrote that Goitain had pushed his students to add precision, detail, and better documented evidence, and not to revise his conclusions, offering us, I think not to avoid revise, and not least to revise his conclusions, that's it, offering a set of arguments and hypotheses while opening the door for counter arguments. We dwarfs owe him more than can ever be expressed in words. We can only hope that our vision remains as clear as that of the author of Mediterranean Society. Many of the people that you see working in the field now are his students or students of his students. That's the dynasty that he created. So one of the conclusions is that men and women in public, men were not supposed to know women outside their own households. And his evidence was that court records, when a woman appears, they always introduce her with, after we have taken proper cognizance of her. And he thinks that that phrase was probably just for tradition, because lots of times it was obvious that the woman was known. And it, might even show up on the second day of testimony where the woman had been there the previous day and had proper cognizance taken of her. I think there was even a case where it was an argument over who a woman was betrothed to. So obviously there the men knew who she was. And but he's finding other documents that indicate that women were very integrated in the life of the society, and Egypt was probably somewhat looser than other Islamic countries. He was fascinated by women's names because there was a large number and variety of names. There was only a few names that were repeated up to 20 times, and only 8 names that showed up more than 10 times. The names had meaning that seemed to express the hopes and dreams a woman had for her daughter. They're very different names that were known in names from ancient Israel or pre-Islamic Arabia. Names were generally secular, no religious context or biblical names, except for maybe a few cases in upper class Karaite families. Many names start with sit, meaning mistress or female ruler. For instance, Sit al-Amam, she who rules over the turbans, which were men. Sit Baghdad, the mistress over Baghdad. Sit Fakir, glory. Sit Thana, praise. Sit is, fame. Karima, noble, distinguished, or sister, which dear one, which now means daughter. So that was names indicating ruling, overcoming, or victory. Genealogies were confined to men only. So when you have a list of genealogies, they only say who the fathers, grandfathers were. Women are never listed on them. So he said they really don't know if the women had names that were repeated as we do in Ashkenazi families. But women did work. Women working outside the home wasn't prevalent until the 12th century and later. Typical professions were needlework, spinning, bride comber, she's the one who got everything ready for a wedding, a wet nurse, midwife, doctors, which were probably trained by tradition, not by apprenticeship, teachers, both of embroidery and a few in schools, preparing the dead, and funeral wailing were some of the professions that you'd find women in. Goitein surmised that the problem of working women was virtually absent during the 10th and 11th centuries, but became acute in the 12th and paramount from the 13th on. And basically things were getting economically more difficult because the Mamluks came in as ruling Arabs, and they were a lot more severe and harsher to outsiders, or not outsiders, but non-Muslims. And so his assessment is based on, so he was thinking that it was because of the economic issues and maybe that things were getting looser in their society. And he based that on ketubot, or marriage contracts, some of which beginning to include clauses permitting the wife to keep her own earnings. And Goitein thought only the poor would permit their wives to work outside the home. So that's why he attributed it to that. But later research by Oded Zinger suspects that maybe the wives were taking on wage labor on top of their traditional obligations. So things were not getting easier for them. And he said that it may not have been economic concerns. It was due to economic concerns, not an improvement of the women's status. And the other issue is that during the Mamluk period, the textile industry expanded, and women were mostly involved in the textile industry. So that probably created more ways for women, both Muslim and Jewish, to make money. And very often women's earnings weren't shared. Suzanne, would you like to read about husbands? This is an example of legal protections that were added. No, Peter?
Sorry about that. Husband who intends to travel abroad allocates 20 dirhams per month, namely 5 per week for his wife, plus some wheat, the 20 dirhams to be used also for his
Capitation tax.
thank you, capitation tax. What kind of tax is that?
If you weren't Muslim, you had to pay a poll tax.
Okay. And from which I don't think that was uncommon in those times, and from which she will pay rent and other household expenses, while he stipulates expressly not to lay claim on any earnings made by her through work and spinning. Dated Tishrei, 1445, 1133.
Yeah, 1133 is our reckoning of time. I'm not sure what they base theirs on. So basically, what he's saying, that occupations that we hardly ever found was domestic help, because that was done mostly by slave girls. And if you couldn't afford a slave girl, everybody was, the whole family was living in the same house, so that the task could be shared. And cooking, because wood was very expensive, and there were great access to freshly prepared foods in the bazaar.
I like that.
Yeah. But there were exceptions. There were a couple of examples. One was a woman who had to look after a rav and a judge. She was a foreigner without anybody to support her, and she also received clothing from a foreign charity. Another example was from a woman in Ahmadiyya to her mother and to her sister in Alexandria, which was done by a scribe, written by a scribe, Khalif al-Sofer, in Judeo-Arabic. And the writer had a married daughter as well as a son who'd been away for 8 years. I am working as a maid in every house, and my strength is weakened. And she also mentions her son Ibrahim and Moshe. This is what Goiten's card looks like. Therefore, I'm really not convinced that his cards were just in English. And I'm not sure from looking at it if it's Hebrew or Judeo-Arabic or something else that he wrote in.
I see something where it says he was married to a girl.
Let me, oops, I'm going to try to get back there.
Sarah, could he have made up his own language, as many people in his condition, do? They make up a language to take their notes.
Possibly, but he was very concerned that other scholars could use them, his notes.
I'm in the
That's
middle
kind of unusual. Some people don't want other scholars to see their things.
No, he was doing this to try to make, because I mean, not any one person can study all of the Geniza. It's huge. What were you going to say, Peter?
I'm finding a sentence here kind of in the middle. Her daughter was married to no, I don't know. It's not a girl. It's just
Yeah.
who was also 1 month, and here we get something in Hebrew, and 6. I can't read it well, but I can see English words in there.
Yeah, there are English words in there. So I imagine somebody working in the field would be able to read it.
Well, it's Hebrew characters. The question is, what language is it?
Right, exactly, exactly.
So these are just names. It's hard to tell from names.
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
what-
and that's the thing, is that a lot of work was done, a lot of the documents there, you might have some Arabic, but there was a lot of Judeo-Arabic. There are all sorts of languages found in the Geniza. This is what the letter looks like. A scribe did it. It's quite beautiful. Now, women are often found on charity rolls because women's work wasn't typically well paid. And so a substantial number of people on the public aid were women. Sometimes they were widowed, divorced, deserted, or they were people who never had support. It required registration for for public welfare, and then you had to pick up at the synagogue your semi-weekly bread and occasional wheat, clothing, and cash. So therefore, the women had to have contact with men, both the administrators of the charity and other men that might have received charity, because everything was picked up at the same time. There wasn't a separate pickup for women and men. So Goitein surmised that perhaps there were marriages of convenience between older men and women to combine households because they met at these things. But I think that's just a surmise. And
it may be partly being associated with Muslim customs. When Dilly and I were in Morocco I don't know how long ago it was, before the pandemic, A woman, one of the lecturers we got a talk from was talking about her grandmother, who in Rabat, Morocco, and at that time never left the house ever.
Mhm.
And she was proud of it because it meant she had a husband who could permit her to never leave the house.
Right.
Yeah. Never,
I'm
not
getting
once,
used to
not
that.
not for anything, just stayed in the house.
Yeah, I'm sort of getting used to being in the house. But yeah, you're right. It was definitely because they lived in a Muslim society. So yeah, and they actually, it said that for women to solicit private charity wasn't proper. So only men would solicit private charity.
So are we talking about I'm sorry if I missed it. Are we talking about a specific location, or where is he writing about?
He's writing about Fustat, where the Genizas, mostly Fustat. There may be other, there was a lot of trade. And so you might have letters that went to Tunisia or Alexandria, but all the documents were found in Fustat, which is Old Cairo.
Yeah, so he's talking mostly, we think about that local community, right?
Right. And here's an example, Peter, you read this one.
And what years approximately? 11 something we're talking about?
The big era for Geniza documents was from the 10th, 11th to the 11th to the 13th centuries.
Right, yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
So, short note written and signed by Judge Shmuel ben Sadia stating, the administrators of the compound of the Jerusalemites are advised to pay to the mother of Abraham, better known under the name the mother of the little calf, 9.5 dirhams, her share of the revenue from the compound of the Jerusalemites for the year 1477, 1165, and peace.
Yep. And this is what that looks like. And the compound of Jerusalemites was a row of houses whose rents provided money, alms that were sent to the poor in Jerusalem. But this was written 66 years after the Crusaders kind of devastated Jerusalem. They took over. But he did say that there were other notes from this judge that talk about money from this fund being sent to people who had the surname Damasci, which meant from Damascus. So he's surmising that they were used for resident foreigners of Syro-Palestinian descent.
So,
And she would have had to have found witnesses to testify about her descent and poverty, that she had no family to support her and inability to work. And the witnesses would need to be present at the court. And with a note from the judge, she needed to find a compound administrator, give her cash, or a promissory note for the grocer. If she didn't have cash, a promissory note that she'd give the grocer for food or to her landlord. And the amount of 9.5 dirhams might last her 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah, and I looked it up. Dinars were based on the gold, dirhams were based on silver. And so the conversion between them varied a lot over the years because the price of silver went everywhere. At some points it was 36 dirhams per dinar. But Goitein cites that at the beginning to his preface to volume 3, that basically a lower community official might make 2 dinars a month. Master Mason, if he worked 7 days a week, might make 4 dinars a month. And if a man had to leave her wife and he had to give her sustenance, the typical rate would be 0.5 dinar per month. So that's just to have some idea of the value of the money.
I have a question. So I know there was a period like that the trader, most of the Jews were traders traveling up through Europe.
Right. They
And was it
traveled
the same
everywhere.
period? So they would leave their wives because they were on
Right.
ships.
I'm going to talk about that coming
Okay,
up.
I remember that in a novel I read.
Yes. No, they did. And I'm going to cover it actually now. Marriage. Yeah, they had the three-part marriage, Yukin, Irusin, or Kiddushin, and Nisuin, which we're familiar with. Typically, they would only do two of them. You know, they might do the engagement or the betrothal with the marriage. Girls were generally married as teenagers. Sometimes the matches were made within a family, and sometimes they were made even overseas to connect families for business contacts. The groom gave the bride a mohar, which was basically a gift, and it was divided into two payments. One part was given, a small part was given at the marriage, but the larger part was given at the dissolution of the marriage, such as death or divorce. And basically that would kind of encourage men not to divorce their wives, because they'd have to come up with quite a bit of cash many times. And a woman could ask for a divorce by ransoming herself, in which case she would have to basically forego the second payment. And basically her other property was property that she was given in her bridal kit, her trousseau, the clothing. It might have gifts of, like I said, real estate, jewelry, as well as fancy clothing. And that was her main source of personal wealth. An examination of marital arrangements, they say, should also account that there was a high rate of remarriage, but that could be either widows or divorcees. And Goitein estimated that to be 45%, but Zinger put it to 60 to 80% of marriages were remarriages. So who knows? At this point, generally, only the engagement or betrothal was done. But as of the 12th century, there were more engagement contracts. And, you know, the advantage of that is that you don't have to have a divorce should something not happen. So basically, they added a lot of prenup restrictions, stipulations that were added to protect the bride. One was restrictions on the husband's freedom of movement, specifying the amount of time the husband could be away, asking his wife permission to leave the state, requiring a conditional bill of divorce if he didn't return with, to be used if he didn't return within a given amount of time. One deed had, he will not travel to the land of Israel and Yemen or to faraway countries unless he will write a conditional bill of divorce. Yes, Debbie.
I gotta say, when Martin and I got married in Israel, the rabbi was a rather unconventional man. I mean, he was strictly observant and religious, but he was able to talk to people who weren't. And he was reading from the ketubah. I don't think it's really in there, but he said, you know, the group, it is in there? It's not in this, it's not in what we have hanging on the wall. He said, you know, the groom agrees to provide the bride with jewelry and dresses and this and that, and he may not go north of Damascus or west of Cairo without asking her permission.
That's very nice of him.
and
Now
so
ketubah. Right.
everybody, all the wedding guests loved it.
I bet, yeah. At that point,
Debbie, have you followed that? Have you followed that in any way?
He always asks me, or if he can go to Damascus or Cairo.
At that
and I
point,
usually
really
say, please don't go to
Cairo.
Damascus or Cairo.
Yeah, yes, Syria was not probably a place you'd want to visit at any point.
Not lately.
Not lately. You also had protection for the wife's freedom of movement, such as he bound himself to never mention to her any obligation to stay at home. He promised not to prohibit her from going to any place that a respectable Jewish woman was allowed to visit, supposed to visit, like the synagogue, a public bath, or to parties of congratulation or condolences, or the marketplace for buying and selling linen.
I wonder if they have mahjong.
Or no, yeah, right. Nor would he forbid her to go to the house of her sister to see her whenever she liked, nor would he forbid her sister from coming to his house. Then there were stipulations regarding the husband's behavior. Numerous prenup agreements preserve the stipulations which sanction the husband should he be physically or verbally abusive to his wife or her parents. For example, one agreement states that the husband undertook upon himself that her mother would live with her in one apartment, and that he would feed her and support her, and that he had no right either to abuse her nor act violently against her. So you had to be nice to your mother-in-law in some cases. In another contract, no one from his family is allowed to enter his wife's house, because that could be a big issue of problems, because since the whole family tended to live in one domicile. Nor his mother or sister. No one is allowed to annoy her or abuse her, and he shall not raise his hand against her. There were also some where they weren't allowed to keep slave girls that the wife didn't approve of, because slave girls were commonly used as concubines, especially in the Muslim society.
It's quite advanced.
Yeah, and there was also evidence that some of the Jewish courts in Egypt refused to marry a couple before checking that neither party was currently betrothed to someone else. So, you know, basically men had the right to marry more than one woman, but it was required that the woman approve of anybody he were to marry. So, you know, depending on the stipulations that were in her contracts.
Yeah, another comment about what Debbie and I went through getting married in Israel is just, it's obviously a reflection of the same thinking that moved forward, you know, a whole, 800 years. But we had to go through a whole proceeding with the religious court in Jerusalem to prove that we were not married to anybody else. And of course, when you're a foreigner and you just showed up in Israel, how do you prove that you've never been married anyplace else? That was a complex thing that required a number of witnesses, including schlepping her parents, who happened to live in Israel, to the rabbinic court in Jerusalem, where the only thing that convinced the judges is that Debbie's parents started talking to the judges in Yiddish.
That's good. I'm glad they could speak.
Okay, these people are for real, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I often wondered, how would I prove that I'm Jewish if I had, you know, luckily we just found my mother's ketubah. Okay, this is an example of a prenup. Debbie, would you like to read it?
On Tuesday, 27th of Nisan, 1468, era of documents, 1157 CE, in Fustat, Egypt, situated on the Nile River under the jurisdiction of our master Samuel, the great Nagid, the Nagid of the diaspora, may his name be established forever. Abu al-Wafa, the young man, son of Abu al-Allah, concluded a match with Sit al-Tana, daughter of Rabbi Joseph the Cantor, may his end be good. And they both agreed that the mohar will be 40 gold dinars, of which he will pay in advance 10 gold dinars at the time of marriage, which is set to take place by the month of Nisan, 1469 era of documents. So that's a year later. Mm-hmm. And there will remain incumbent on her 30 gold dinars, good, excellent. And there and here are the well-known conditions imposed by the daughters of Israel. She will be regarded by him as trustworthy in all matters concerning food and drink and any claim, and that he will not marry another woman as long as he is with her, and will not keep a slave girl disliked by her. And if he will do any of the above, he has to pay her late installment, and her earnings will remain in her possession. I just want to comment what that means about the food and drink is that he trusts her kashrut, that if she says it's kosher, then it's kosher. Yeah. And since ordinarily women can't bear witness, but this is one area in which women, you know, were in charge of halakha. Anyway, and if the month of Nisan arrives and he will not marry her, the aforementioned Abu al-Wafa, the fiancé, testifies upon his oath in our presence, when he is in the soundness of his mind and freedom of his will, that he has in his possession 10 Egyptian dinars as a complete debt for the aforementioned Sit al-Tana, the fiancé, to be paid if he will change his mind and will not marry her on Nisan 1469. We performed a kinyan with Abu al-Wafa on the above mentioned conditions, a complete and weighty kinyan with a legal instrument fit for doing so, effective immediately, in accordance with his will, without any sort of compulsion. By the way, a kinyan is a way of acquiring a bride, I think, by giving her some object of value. But the kinyan part is you're saying you have to testify that you're doing this of your own free will. And for Martin and me, he was supposed to hold a piece of cloth, and the two witnesses pulled on the cloth quickly, and he had to hold on to it to show that he was completely conscious at the time of making this agreement. Okay, but in accordance with his will, without any sort of compulsion, nullifying all secret dispositions and conditions. Afterwards, we performed a kinyan with Situm, Sit Altana's mother, who testifies that she has in her possession 10 dinars as a complete debt to be given effective immediately to Abu al-Wafa, the fiancé, if her daughter, Sit al-Tana, will change her mind and refuse to marry the aforementioned Abu al-Wafa on the date agreed upon. We performed a kinyan with Situm regarding the above. After we approved her identity, a complete and weighty kinyan, effective immediately in accordance with his will. His will? Okay. Well, Situm is the mother, but
Right.
anyway, without any sort of compulsion. I guess it's a typo. They were using standard language. They got lost.
It's
Nullifying all. Sorry.
I took it from a paper by Amir Ashur. He did the translation, so it could be his typo.
Okay. Nullifying all secret dispositions and conditions, and everything is valid. Ben Rav Abu Allah is written between the lines, and everything is valid. And then the signatures, Saadia ben Abraham, may he rest in Eden. Alazar HaKohen ben Atiyah HaKohen, may he rest in Eden.
So basically, the interesting thing here is that her mother was involved, and she also had to agree. So women weren't always involved in the contracting, but they could happen.
Sarah, was this an indication that because there was a lag of time between the time of the betrothal and the wedding, that this was a long distance fix up?
Yes, and no.
Time for the bride to come to where the groom was?
Yes and no, because what happens here is it could be that it was long distance, but it's also, this is obviously an engagement, not a betrothal, because if they were betrothed, they would have to have a divorce if he didn't show up or he changed his mind. So it could be, sometimes the engagement was done in advance. And
well, what I find interesting is that that the engagement is where all the conditions are set, right?
Yes,
and that's
started.
not too different from what happens in Israel today, for example, where the families will get together and say, okay, if this couple's going to get married, who's doing the wedding? Who's putting the down payment down on the apartment? Who's providing all the household goods and all that kind of stuff? So there is a negotiation between the parents of the bride and groom.
That is actually what happened.
All this stuff, and this is it's not any different from what we're reading here, which is what I find very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. One other thing, my cousins in England tell me that an engagement party is sometimes bigger than the wedding.
Mm-hmm. And that actually, the informal agreements and the informal engagement, where the things were negotiated but not necessarily put in a contract, had been done before the 1100s. And one of the papers I read indicated that they think it probably was because the trade routes were more precarious and people are away from each other longer, that they decided that and an informal agreement that's not in contract form is not enforceable in court, which they quoted a Talmud. So that's why they put this in. This was created for protection. But you're absolutely right, and that's exactly how it was done in the Talmud.
We have echoes of this today.
Mm-hmm.
The same stuff.
Exactly. And now I have property. Women did own property.
Sorry, Sarah, I have one thing to ask. Wasn't the betrothal considered basically a marriage?
Absolutely.
It's hard to get out. An engagement, it sounds like, was more informal. But once you were betrothed And I don't think that was only in Jewish culture.
Well, I don't know,
I
but
don't
I know
know
in
it was.
Jewish culture, a betrothal is binding. And so if you wanted to get out of it or not complete it, the woman could be chained if she didn't get a get. So yeah, so that's another reason why they ended adding it to the prenup engagement, especially since the groom might disappear somewhere at sea before the
If I'm
wedding.
not
happened.
mistaken, now the betrothal and the wedding take place in the same process under the chuppah, right?
Yes,
Irushin and Kiddushin happen at the same time.
yes, absolutely. Property, a woman enters her house was a statement made, but that actually refers to her entering her husband's home, which was often with his family. But women did own property, and property was usually given to women for financial security. They brought into the marriage houses, apartments, fractions of houses. Rarely did the couple live in the marriage property, the property that she brought into the marriage. And there are cases where a woman owned more than one piece of property, and there are many examples of that found. And there are documents that have shown that women maintain their property, even if they had to sell items from their bridal kit. Debbie, would you, oh no, you did, Rona, could you read about this example? Unmute, please.
What I did, sorry. The engagement contract of Abu Mansur Sima B. Yefet to Sit al Kahasa in Futsat 1146. Sit al Kahasa was the daughter of Abu Barakat, son of Yosef Lebdi, the India trader. The groom deposited a very large early marriage gift of 40 dinars with a third party and promised the delayed marriage gift of 100 dinars. The bride received 5 shares out of 24 of the house that used to belong to her grandfather and half of her father's house. Moreover, the rent from her real estate will be in her hands, not in his hands, and she may deal with it as she sees fit. She also is promised the right to choose the domicile. Her very large dowry amounts to 500 dinars. Actually, it adds up to 496 dinars. And it is stated that this sum was not exaggerated.
Because very often there was always a list of what the bridal trousseau or the bridal kit or outfit was, and with their value. That was part of the contracts, and sometimes it was exaggerated. Then there was a couple of really interesting, another case where there were 2 unfinished documents found. And basically, it was a case of interest. And it was a common Islamic legal trick to charge interest to a co-religionist was for the A to sell his house to B. The lender. A still lives in his house, but he pays exorbitant rent, the interest, and then he buys back his house because you're not allowed to charge interest from your co-religionist. So yet Jaida used her real estate for a loan, but she wanted to get out of her interest payments. She needed 50 dinars, so she sold David 2/3 of a house she owned for 50 dinars and an agreement to pay him 8 dinars a year for 2 years, which would have been 16% interest. But she wasn't happy about it. So as I said, there were 2 unfinished documents because one of them, she goes to court and says, I took out a loan, and the court clerk just broke off recording because this was approved of in the Muslim system, the Muslim court, and the Jewish court generally recognized it as well too, because you're not supposed to take out a loan with interest. So then we had the second one where 2 witnesses were testifying, and it says, we responded to her request and we went. She locked us all in, brought in the above mentioned Mr. David, and seated him and herself close to the door, behind which we were, so that we should hear him word for word. What each said to him, of each of them said, she said to him, Daoud, listen, no one is between us. Return to God, or behave as a man should, and do not claim something on which you have no right. I owe you 50 dinars. How come you sue me for 66? Have we received from you anything above 50 dinars as the price of the house? So the clerk kind of broke off writing then too, because obviously this was an agreement of interest. Women were also seen to be lenders of money and the buyers of slave girls. Male servants tended to work with men, and they worked as traveling merchants as business agents or aides, but slave girls did domestic work. Yeah, and in Islamic society, the men could make any use they wanted of the slave girl, but Jewish women had clauses that made the husband not able to take concubines. And women in the economy. So economic life was restricted. Possessions were usually acquired by gifts of real estate, as is their bridal outfits, but they bought and sold textiles and jewelry. But in general, their trade wasn't large scale, or production wasn't large scale. So they were very dependent on husbands or male relatives, but some did require means of their own and definitely had contact with men outside their families. And Goyton cites examples of women becoming guardians of children and executors of estates. So some of them did have business experience. And there are court cases. You'd have women show up in court cases quite a bit. And there were two conflicting principles. One was a desire to protect the woman, and two, the belief that no party should ever be listened to by a judge without the other party present. So most common so basically, she either shows up or they would send witnesses to her to take her testimony. But yeah, and in some cases, she might use a representative to represent her in court, but depending on the complexity of the case, because men also could use a representative if the case was quite complex. But according to Goyton, with the exception of very young women, women kept the courts busy and even sued in a Muslim court, which is something the Jewish courts really try to keep their community from doing. Most of the common documents found were releases of responsibility and indemnification against future lawsuits. Zinger discovered a pattern whereby the court and the elders tended to show a greater degree of understanding for men's predicaments and to adopt men's perspectives regarding the events that led to litigation. Consequently, when the court sought a compromise, women were subjected to pressure, which frequently took the form of a religious admonition. For example, that God or divine law required them to act in a certain way. Apparently, it was far more unusual for a court to use that type of ploy with men. Goyton wanted to show that these women were strong, and he claimed that the courts did not have to show them special consideration, for the women were neither weak nor inexperienced nor overly shy or snobbish, but the women might not have been as powerful as he thought. So they did often involve men to choose them as suits that involved their husbands, such as divorce proceedings or widowhood claims. Goyton strove to show that women were quite active, to the point that one might even think they were overzealous in keeping the courts occupied. So newer research shows that maybe that's not true. Travel, women traveled. It was a very mobile society. They might want to visit their family in distant towns, sometimes with their husbands and sometimes alone. They visit holy sites. The husband might want her to join him on a business trip, especially during the Mediterranean routes. Or she might need to leave a provincial town to bring a suit in the capital, perhaps against her husband. Needy women sometimes traveled to look for better opportunities, and older women did quite a bit of travel. So it wasn't uncommon to have distant family because of the lifestyle, that a trade was a big, big part of their business. And you might also have long trips to visit female relatives who needed help. And there was actually a statute created about visits to Damu, which is south of Cairo, where there's a shrine for Eliyahu, where it said that women were not allowed to go there unless they were accompanied by a husband, brother, or adult son, or she was very old, because apparently it was common for women to go there. There was a condition in a ketubah they found that said that the wife, who was a widow with young children, was not permitted to leave Fustat. And there were lots of letters from adult children begging their widowed mothers to come stay with them. Goitein said that women didn't have very difficult housework, which may not have been true. He was comparing it to the Yemeni women that he had interviewed earlier. He said that grain was not milled with a hand mill, but that was taken to a mill. Bread could be bought in the market, and even if bread was prepared at home, it could be baked at a bakery. Again, wood was very expensive, so they would often buy hot food from the market. Boys were sent off to school, and in poor families, the community paid to educate the boys. And eventually they'd leave for work early in their lives, and girls would help care for the younger siblings because they were married in their teens. But it's hard to say that really that their housework was not difficult. Because for one thing, women's domestic work is not put in the Guinness records in any place that they found so far. These are the places a woman would visit in town. Synagogue, she might pray from the gallery, or she might attend business meetings about community affairs from the gallery. Bathhouses were very important. They were usually visited at least once a week and on Rosh Chodesh, and they were very social events. Of course, visits at childbirth, marriages, and mourning, and visiting friends and female friends and family. But there were some examples of independent women. Oh, and yeah, Goitein says, but they didn't come together to study Bible. And for one thing, there was an example found in Maimonides' Responsa. There was a letter from both the husband and a letter from the wife, but he didn't publish any of their names. So the husband claimed that it injured his dignity to have his wife as a schoolmistress. Basically, this was a very poor woman. She was married at the age of 9 because she was orphaned to a woman's son. And the woman lived with her sons in a house that the girl owned part of. So that the woman had a desire to keep the house together. And the woman promised to maintain the couple for 10 years, but at 7 years of maintaining them, she said she couldn't honor that obligation anymore. And that happened just when the woman was about to give birth to a son. And that point, the husband took off for 3 years without leaving any support for the wife or his family. And then when he came back, he sired another son, but did nothing to bring in any money. He didn't even pay his poll tax. Wife or mother had to pay his poll tax to keep him out of jail. And he didn't even provide the lowest grade oil for the lamps. So the girl had to visit her relatives' apartments to see any light. And then the man took off when his second son was 1.5 years old, and he stayed away for 3 years. So the wife did make use of her husband, and she learned to read the Bible. And she worked on her skills when her husband was gone. And at the age of 25, her brother, a school teacher, made her partner at his school. And that lasted for 6 years when her brother left town. And she ran the school by herself with the help of her oldest son when he was 17 years old. When she was teaching at the school, the husband stayed with his mother and children. He stayed with his mother. And whenever he had money, he spent it on himself or his mother. He never spent any on his children or his wife. And all he brought into the household in 25 years of marriage was a mat. She rented a room at the school for 14 dirhams, and she stayed there with her boys during the month. So the husband claimed it injured his dignity to have his wife as a schoolmistress. She had no desire to serve him, sexually or otherwise. And if she didn't give up teaching, he wanted to take an additional wife. The wife claimed she couldn't leave the school with her son even for a day, since the parents sent their children to her, not for her son. And if the husband agreed that she would live with him at her apartment in the family home or the school, if he lived at the school, he could keep the rental income of the apartment. Yeah, so that she would stay with him if he would live with her. Well, Maimonides replied, the husband may not marry someone else without the consent of his wife. The demand of the husband that she give up teaching was endorsed by the law and could not be a claim for divorce. And then he told her, if the husband did not support his wife, he could be forced to set her free and pay her a delayed marriage gift. He had the right to forbid her to teach. But she could get her freedom by declaring she could not live with him, but then she would forfeit her wedding gift. And as a divorcee, she would have disposition over herself and she could do what she likes. So he really wanted to take a second wife and he wasn't going to give her a divorce. So her only choice was to give up her bridal claim. So I got these confused. There was also one example of an incredibly wealthy woman who was very well known. There are more documents referencing her than any other woman in the Geniza. And she was independent, very independent, quite wealthy. There are 5 full documents that deal with her affairs. Her name was Karima, or Dear One, but she was known as Wusha, or object of yearning, or possibly one without whom one feels lonely. And she was called Wusha al-Dalayala, the broker or banker. Her father was Amar, the banker, son of Ezra from Alexandria, and a document shows that he had 3 daughters and 2 sons. One document shows that her wedding trousseau was not immense, but it did have some pieces of jewelry. Its value was stated as 316 dinars, but it seems to be overstated. Goitein says it was probably more like 150 dinars, which would be appropriate at that time for her status. Her groom, Arya ben Judah, was an impressive either. Her wedding gift was 10 dinars with a delayed payment of 15 dinars. And the marriage seems to be short-lived. A fragment was found in a transaction with someone in Alexandria that lists her as Awusha the broker, the divorcee of Arya ben Judah. They did have a daughter, Sit Gazelle, or Lady Gazelle. This is known because there's a document where Sit Gazelle buys half a house and she's designated as Sit Gazelle bint Awusha. So she was known by her mother's name. So Wusha was a very important business person who moved about in the world of men. Goitein says, while female brokers weren't rare, they were mostly from poor women, not wealthy ones. And she stood up for herself in a world of men. There's a court record of her in April 1098 that shows she showed up at the synagogue compound meeting with the Beadle, a Bible school teacher, because she received a court summons because Ula ben Yosef sued her for a trifling sum, and she was not about to honor that summons. So they brought her there when the court wasn't in session. She was very independent. She had an affair with Hasuna of Ascalon that produced a son, Abu Sa'ad. And 2 documents are very instructive, her will and a testimony given after her death about her relationship with Hassun. And so this is Wusha's last will to her relatives. To her brother, she gives 100 dinars from objects given as security. She had both cash and notes for loans that she'd given, plus their collateral. A pair of 5 rings and a dabiki robe. Her sister, she gives 50 dinars from objects given as security, as well as a mourning dress, a half mantle, and a head covering. The daughter of my paternal uncle, 5 dinars, a cloak, a half mantle, a pair of house leek rings, something of silver, a woman's cap, the bed on which I lie, but not the carpets. And my sister Siba, 10 dinars. There's nothing in here given to her daughter. But she did have charitable donations. The cemetery, 25 dinars, the synagogues in Old Cairo, 20 dinars, and there were 2 synagogues, the Iraqi synagogue and the Palestinian synagogue. The synagogues of Damu and New Cairo, 5 dinars for the purchase of the study. The poor of Old Cairo, 20 dinars. Joseph's wife, 5 dinars, each of her 2 brothers, 5 dinars. An orphan girl in New Cairo, a relative, 2 dinars. And then she appointed an heir. The remaining security shall be added to the cash and gold which I possess, namely 300 dinars, which are ready with me, and 67 dinars deposited of Lady Ikhtiar, in addition to all I possess in cash and kind, in rugs and carpets. All this shall be kept for my son on conditions I shall mention, and if he remains alive and attains maturity, it shall be handed over to him. If, however, God forbid, death overtakes him before 1/2 of his shall be given to the synagogues in Old Cairo and to the poor in equal halves. The other half shall be divided between my heirs in equal shares, to wit, my brother, my sisters, and the daughter of my paternal uncle. To his father Hassun of Ascalon, not 1 penny shall be given, except that 2 promissory notes concerning a debt of 80 dinars, which he owes me, will be handed over to him in case my son meets his predestined death, in addition to 10 dinars out of the estate of the boy. But the rest is for the synagogues and the poor of equal share, and only 1/2, and the other half for my family, as I've explained before. And then she was concerned about her son's education. The Melamed, Rabbi Moses, shall be taken to him and shall teach him the Bible and the prayer book to the degree that it is appropriate that he should know them. The teacher shall be given a blanket and a sleeping carpet so that he can stay with him. He shall receive from the boy's estate every week 5 dirham, according to the judgment of the orphans' court and the elders. And then, of course, her funeral expenses. She really wanted a very fitting, elaborate funeral.
Pretty expensive funeral.
Yes, yeah. Shrouds and 50 dinars from available cash. Purchase from the 50 dinars. A dakiki garment for 6 dirhams, a cloak for 6 dirhams, a talicat for 2 dirhams, a hood for 6 dirhams, a dabiki kerchief for 2 dirhams, a veil for 2 dirhams, 2 starry covers for 6 to 7 dinars, and a coffin. Pay the pallbearers and all expenses from me until I reach my grave, and a tomb will be built. I believe the cemetery is about 2 miles from the town. The remainder of the 50 dinars shall be distributed to the cantors who will walk behind my coffin, to each according to his rank and excellence. So I guess she wanted to make sure people remembered her.
Can I ask a question? So did they have, the Muslims have burial like the Jews, like did they have in the ground only, or did they have crypts on top?
I am not positive on that, but I think it's in the ground.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
well,
I don't
what
know.
you're talking about. I mean, there's sarcophagi above ground in Israel.
Right,
That's
right. I
true.
know that. I know that. That's why I
That's
asked if that was the custom, just to have a flat, grave with a, we have headstones now that go like this, but old graves didn't used to have that. And a lot of them in Israel don't have that. Some have sarcophagi. So we don't know what that looked like, but they obviously expected the woman to, out of her money, to pay for her own.
No, she was extremely wealthy.
Oh,
I
okay.
think normally the husband would bury her. Yes, Debbie. Debbie?
Oh, well, 2 things. One of them, I'm worried about the daughter. And also there are 2 sisters that get very different portions. Is that like talked about at all, or is that we can
yeah.
make it up for ourselves?
Now, he surmises that she gave more to her brothers because she was probably generous with wedding gifts, and that possibly the sister that got little was a stepsister or, more distant relative. That's a surmise, though.
Okay.
We don't really
So we're
know.
at about 2:08, so maybe we can wrap it up in the next couple of
Yep,
minutes.
this is it, actually. The last one, actually, Sue, would you like to read it? It's
Sure.
talking about the relationship between Wusha and Hassun.
The elder of Abu al-Yafeth, the son of the elder Masila, may he rest in Eden, appeared before us and made the following deposition while we were constituted as a court of 3. He said, I was with the cantor, the diadem, may God accept him with favor, when Wusha, the broker, came in and said, do you not have any advice for me? I had an affair with Hassan and conceived in him. We contracted a marriage before a Muslim notary, but I'm afraid that he might deny being the father of my child. She then lived in the house of Ibn al-Sukhari on the uppermost floor. He, the cantor, said, go and gather some people and let them surprise you with him so that your assertion might be confirmed. She did so, gathering 2 who surprised her with him and confirmed her assertion. She was then pregnant with this Abu Sa'id, her son, whom she conceived in her illicit relation with Hassun. We know also that on the fast of the atonement, she went to the synagogue with the Iraqians, but when the Nasi of blessed memory accused her, he expelled her from the synagogue. I know all this for sure and deposit herewith my testimony to this effect. There appeared also in the court the ritual slaughterer Abu Sayyid Halfun HaKohen, son of Yosef HaKohen in Western Eden, and deposited the following testimony in my presence. I was living in the house of Hibat Allah ibn al-Sakuri, may God accept him with favor, on the ground floor for many years, while Al-Wusha, the broker, had her domicile on the uppermost part of the house. In those days, she came down once to one of the tenants, namely Abu Nasir the Kohen, the Cantor ibn al-Makhlouri, and to the Abraham the Jerusalemite, known as the son of the Karit, and said to them, please come up with me to my place for something. The two went up with her and found Hassoun sitting in her apartment, wine and perfumes.
So she was this is it, but she was very concerned that her son be allowed to marry at one point. She claimed that she contracted a marriage in front of a Muslim notary, but that's kind of questionable because obviously she wasn't splitting any of her inheritance with him, which he would have been entitled to had they really been married. And obviously the Iraqi Nasi wasn't really impressed with her behavior. So she was a case that Goitan became very fond of, and she sounds like she was an amazing character. Then the thing is that, according to one of his, to Melamed, Goitan envisioned that all of the documents and fragments that would be indexed and cataloged at some point so that all could be studied. And that it apparently, that once they were all studied, we'd have even a clearer idea of what was really happening in that society. And that's what I'll talk about next time.
It's absolutely fascinating. So thank you, Sarah.
This was great. This was
good.
just great.
I was worried.
We have a final session with Sarah. We'll probably have a skip month in July, and then in August, Rona Lesser will be starting a series on a topic in art, which she and I will talk about sometime this week, and we'll get an announcement out about what exactly she'll be talking about. But that the next series will be Rona on a art Jewish topic.
It's going to be about contemporary Jewish artists who create visual midrash.
Oh, very cool, very cool.
So, and then I'll hope you'll discuss the midrash as we present the images, what they're creating. I'm doing a cage session on that. That will be a lot shorter. And I've just got to start getting to work on it as soon as I finish my Blaffer lessons.
Excuse me, Martin, can I just say one thing?
Sure.
Lisa, who I think is here, there she is. Lisa and I are in the B'nai Mitzvah class at Beth Yeshurun, and it is next week, the 22nd. You can get to it from their web channel. They have a website, and it's a streaming channel.
Okay.
No Zoom. And we would be happy to have anybody, especially Lisa, who's did a really good job. We'd be happy if anybody is interested to please come.
Can you send us the Zoom particulars? Get an email out. We can get an email out.
It's Lisa. Oh, I'm sorry. I will get from Cantor Dorf tomorrow the details of how to get to the streaming. It will also be on YouTube for posterity.
That makes it easy.
I think most of it is on YouTube, and the posterity part is one that doesn't please me. But anyway, anybody, we'd be happy to have you come. As I said, Lisa in particular is doing a really good job.
Thank you, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you,
Shabbat
Sarah.
shalom.
Sarah, thank you.
But she will
Bye-bye.
be fine.
See you.
Bye.
This was fascinating.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Really, very,
Thank you so
Very
much.
good.
really interesting. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.